Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, Chapter 6. The first part of their journey was performed in too melancholy of a disposition to be otherwise than tedious and unpleasant. But as they drew towards the end of it, in their interest to the appearance of the country which they were to inhabit, overcame their dejection, and a view of Barton Valley, as though it entered in, gave them cheeriness. It was a pleasant, fertile spot, well wooded, rich in pasture. After winding along it for more than a mile, they reached their own house. A small green court was the whole of its demesne in front, and a neat wicket gate admitted it to them. As a house, Barton Cottage, though small, was comfortable and compact, but as a cottage it was defective, and the buildings were regular. The roof was tiled, the windows' shutters were not paint green, nor were the walls covered in honeysuckles. A narrow passage led directly through the house and into the garden. On each side of the entrance was a sitting room, about 16 square feet, and beyond them were the offices of the stairs. 4 bedrooms and 2 garrets formed the rest of the house. It had not been many years in good repair, and incomparable of Norland, it was in poor, small indeed. But with the tears of recollection called forth, and they were entered to the house, were soonly dried away. They were cheerful by the joy of the servants on their arrival, and each of the sake of their others resolved to appear happy. It was very early in September. The season was fine, and from the first seeing of the place under the advantage of good weather, they received an impression of its favor, which was material service and recommendation to their last approbation. The situation of the house was good. Hill-high horses rose immediately behind, and no great distance on each side, some of which were open downs and other cultivated and woody. The village of Barton was chiefly on one of these hills, and formed a pleasant view of the cottage windows. Their prospect in front was more extensive. It commanded the whole of the valley and reached into the country beyond. The hills which surrounded the cottage terminated the valley in that direction. Under another name and in another course, it branched out again between 2 of the steepest of them. With the size of the furniture of the house, Mrs. Dashwood was upon the whole well satisfied, though for her former style of life rendered many additions to the latter indispensable. Yet to add to the improve was to delight her, and she had at this time ready money enough to supply all that was wanted in the great elegance of the apartments. As for the house itself, to be sure, said she, it is too small for our family, but we will make ourselves tolerably comfortable in the present. As it is too late in the year to make improvements, perhaps in the spring, if I have plenty of money, as I dare say I shall, we may think about building. These parlors are both too small for such parties of our friends as I hope to see often collected here, and I have some thoughts of throwing the passage into one of them, with perhaps a part of the other, and so leaving the remainder, that the other form an entrance. This, with the new drawing room, may be easily added, and bedchamber and garret above, will make a very snug little cottage. I could wish the stairs were handsome, but one must not expect everything, though I suppose it would have no difficult matter to be widening them. I shall see how much I am beforehand with the world, and in the spring we will plan our improvements accordingly. In the meantime, till all these alterations can be made, the savings of the income of 500 a year by a woman who has never saved in her life, they were wise enough to be contented with the house as it was. And each of them was busy in arranging their particular concerns, and endeavoring that by placing them around their books and other possessions to form themselves a home. Marianne's pianoforte was unpacked and properly disposed of, and Eleanor's drawings were affixed to the walls of the sitting room. In such employments as these, they were interrupted soon after breakfast, the next day, by the entrance of the landlord, who called to welcome them to Barton, and offer them every accommodation of his own house and garden in which they might be present and efficient. Sir John Middleton was a good-looking man about 40. He had formerly visited at Stanhill, but it was too long ago for young cousins to remember him. His countenance was, although goodly humored, and his manners were as friendly as the style of his letter. Their arrival seemed to afford him real satisfaction, and their comfort to be an object of real solicitude to him. He said much of his earnest desire of their living in the most sociable terms with the family, and pressed them so cordially to dine at Barton park every day till they were better seated at their home. Though his entreaties were carried to a point of preservation beyond civility, they could not be given offense. His kindness was not confined to words, for within an hour after he left them, a large basket full of garden stuff and fruit arrived from the park, which was followed before the end of the day by a present of game. He insisted, moreover, of conveying all their letters to and from the post for them, and he would not be denied the satisfaction of sending them a newspaper every day. Lady Middleton had sent a very civil message by him, denoting her intention of waiting on Mrs. Dashwood as soon as she could be assured that her visit would be no inconvenience. As this was the message answered by an invitation equally polite, her ladyship was introduced to them the next day. They were, of course, very anxious to see a person on whom had so much of their comfort at Barton must depend, and the elegance of their appearance was favorable to the wishes. Lady Middleton was not more than 6 or 7 and 20. Her face was handsome, her figure tall and striking, and her address graceful. Her manners had all of the elegance which her husband wanted, but they would have been improved by some share of frankness and warmth, and her visit was long enough to detract something from their first admiration by showing that, though perfectly well-bred, she was reserved, cold, and had nothing to say for herself beyond the most common inquiry of remark. Conversations, however, were not wanted, for Sir John was very chatty, and Lady Middleton had taken the wise precaution of bringing with her their eldest child, a fine little boy of about 6 years old, by which means there was one subject always to be recurred by the ladies of the case extremity, for they had to inquire his name and age, admire his beauty, and ask him questions, which his mother answered for him, while he hung about in her and held his own head, to the great surprise of her ladyship, who wondered at his beginning so shy before company, as she could make noise enough at home. On every formal visit, a child ought to be of the party, by way of provision of discourse. In the present case, it took up 10 minutes to determine whether the boy were most like his father or mother, and what particular he resembled for either. For the course everybody differed, and everybody was astonished by the opinions of others. An opportunity was soon to be given by the Dashwoods of debating on the rest of the children, as Sir John would not leave the house without securing the promise of dining at the park the very next day.